Everyone assumes the hardest part of living in space is getting there. It isn't. The hardest part is what happens after, 500 years after. Because a human body that spends 5 centuries away from Earth doesn't stay human in the way you'd expect. It changes, and by the end it might not be able to survive on the planet it came from. So here's the real question. If a body spends generation after generation away from the exact conditions it evolved for, what actually happens to it? Not in theory, physically, biologically, what happens? And the answer comes in 3 parts, and each one builds on the last. Let's start with the first threat, the one most people already know a little about: radiation. On Earth, you're wrapped in 2 invisible shields at all times: the planet's magnetic field and a thick layer of atmosphere above your head, and together they absorb almost all the dangerous radiation coming from space. You've never had to think about this because you've never had to survive without it. Step outside that shield, and the exposure changes completely. Astronauts on short missions already absorb radiation doses many times higher than someone standing on the ground. Over months, that damages cells, raises cancer risk, and starts to break down the lining of blood vessels. Over centuries, across dozens of generations who never set foot under a magnetic field again, that kind of exposure stops being an occasional hazard and starts being a constant pressure, the same way cold or hunger was a constant pressure for early humans on Earth. And constant pressure, given enough time, does what it always does. It selects. Bodies that happen to repair radiation damage a little more efficiently survive a little more often, and 500 years is more than enough time for that kind of quiet selection to add up into something real. Which brings us to the second threat, and this one isn't about a hazard from outside. It's about what happens when you remove something the body has always assumed would be there. Gravity. Every part of a human skeleton evolved under constant downward pressure, and bone responds to that pressure the same way a muscle responds to exercise. Load it and it strengthens. Remove the load and it weakens fast. Astronauts today lose roughly 1 to 1.5% of bone density for every month spent in microgravity, a rate that outpaces almost any disease process seen on Earth. Their bodies aren't sick. They're just no longer being asked to hold anything up. Now stretch that condition across 500 years and multiple generations who are born, live, and die without ever standing under real gravity at all. A skeleton built for 0 real mechanical load doesn't need the same density modern humans have. Over enough generations, natural selection and simple biological economy both push in the same direction toward lighter bones, different muscle distribution, a body shaped less like something built to walk and more like something built to float. Put that same body back on a planet with Earth's gravity, and it wouldn't just struggle. Standing up might genuinely injure it. So that's 2 threats down, radiation and gravity, and each one reshapes the body on its own. But the third threat is the strangest one because it isn't really about physics at all. Isolation. A ship, or a station, or a colony spending 5 centuries away from Earth isn't just physically separated, it's genetically separated. A population that size, closed off from the rest of the species for that long, is exactly the kind of setup that has produced dramatic changes before, and not on some distant world. On a small island called Flores, on Earth, a population of early humans cut off for tens of thousands of years evolved into an entirely distinct, much smaller species, shaped by nothing more exotic than isolation and limited resources. A ship isn't an island, but genetically it behaves like one. A small founding population, no contact with the wider gene pool, generation after generation reproducing only within that closed group. Under those conditions, traits that would be rare on Earth can become common extremely fast, not through some dramatic mutation, but simply because there's nowhere for genetic diversity to come from except what was already on board when the doors closed. And here's the part that connects everything back together. Radiation pressure selects for one set of traits, low gravity selects for another, isolation locks whatever traits happen to be present in that small population and lets them spread through the whole group in a fraction of the time it would take on Earth. None of these 3 threats are acting alone, they're compounding. So picture the actual result, 500 years in. A population with different bone structure, different muscle distribution, different radiation tolerance that's been reproducing in isolation long enough for those differences to become the norm rather than the exception. Not humans who happen to be living in space, humans who have been quietly reshaped by it, the same way cold and hunger and darkness once reshaped the humans who spread across Earth's harshest regions. And here's the uncomfortable twist nobody thinks about until it's already happened. The version of this population best adapted to survive out there is, by definition, the version worst adapted to survive back here. Lighter bones that finally make sense in zero gravity would be a liability against Earth's pull. A body that's tuned for low light and recycled air wouldn't necessarily thrive under an open sky and direct sun. The very changes that let them keep living where they are would be the reason they couldn't come home even if they wanted to. This has already happened once in our history. Different environments on the same planet once produced different kinds of humans, adapted so specifically to their own conditions that moving one into another's world would have been its own kind of hardship. We've just never had to watch it happen to a population that started out exactly like us, drifting apart in real time. Which is really the answer to the question we started with. The hardest part was never leaving Earth. Leaving is a single decision made once by people who still belonged here. The hard part is everything that happens after, quietly, generation by generation, to people who never made that decision at all, who were simply born into what their ancestors chose. By the time 500 years have passed, the ones living it won't experience it as change. They'll just experience it as being exactly what they are. Everyone assumes the hardest part of living in space is getting there. It isn't. It never was. The hardest part is becoming, slowly and without noticing, something that can no longer come home.